The next article I had up here, this is actually interesting. So this started all the way back in 2022. We're in 2024 now.
Yep.
We're still talking about the red heifers. We see here that September 20th, 2022, we see the heifers go from Texas to Israel. And to tell you the truth, I was really stunned the other day when I was shared a video from a very well-known person who has his own media platform. He's got 1 million followers or more. And he kind of denied this whole thing was even happening. He's like,
Wow.
there's none of this is happening. I don't know who's telling you this. I don't know. You need to quit focusing on this and quit focusing on that. And he says, the third temple has nothing to do with us. And I agree that.
Yep.
Third temple has nothing to do with believers. It's not for us. But the red heifers are in Israel. And there is a group of priests who are wanting to sacrifice this. And it is because they want to cleanse the people. They want to cleanse the Temple Mount. They want to build a third temple and begin sacrificing again.
Yep, absolutely. We know the guy that took the red heifers over there, so we know we know they're there.
Yeah.
And I agree with that, and that's something that we kind of want to make sure people understand is these red heifers, the third temple, all that stuff has nothing to do with Christians. What we're looking at is what Jesus says is going to happen in the end times.
Exactly.
What God says is going to happen in the end times. And we're looking at Daniel, and Daniel says that what's going to happen is the Antichrist is going to stop the sacrifices and oblation, and that's in Daniel 9:27, I believe.
Yep.
And the problem we have with that is, in order for him to stop those things, what has to happen?
They have to begin.
They have to start again. Right now, Israel cannot sacrifice because they don't have the priest ready to go. They're not on the Temple Mount to sacrifice. There's all these things that has to happen first. And you say, well, what does that have to do with Christianity? Well, we know that as we get closer to the time where the Antichrist is going to stop the sacrifice, we're getting closer to the time of the tribulation.
Exactly.
Which tells us we're getting closer to the time that when Jesus comes again. And not only that, but the rapture before Jesus comes again. So we're getting toward the end of time by seeing these things come together.
Well, here it is, Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. And I saw the Lamb open one of the seals. This is the first seal. And I heard, as it were, a noise of thunder, and one of the four beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him had a bow, and his crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And this is the revelation of the Antichrist.
Right. Right.
So we know that happens in Revelation chapter 6 as far as the timeline goes. Well, what do you not hear about after Revelation chapter 4? The church. It's gone. So we know that the Antichrist comes at that point. Well, if you go back to Daniel and the prophecies in Daniel, we see here that the Antichrist is going to come, and in 9:27 he says, and he, the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant for 1 week, or a period of 7 is really what it means. And in the midst of that week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And that's where we get that. That's where we understand. So the red heifers are not necessarily for us as Christians to need ritual cleansing.
Correct.
But it is a sign that soon sacrifice will begin. And when sacrifice begins, it will end at the midpoint of the tribulation. So it's going to begin at some point, and I honestly believe that it won't begin until we're raptured. But I'm not positive. I don't know if I could prove it.
I agree with that, but I also with thought my whole life, well, we have to be raptured by now, and then something would happen, like, okay, I could see that.
Yeah.
And we just keep going down this path. Now, one of the things I find interesting, and you say this all the time, so I'm going to steal your thunder, is our uncle would say, he would say, my aunt would say, I don't like it when I see Halloween stuff and then instantly I see Christmas stuff and they have nothing for Thanksgiving. And of course, we like to eat, so Thanksgiving is a good holiday for us, but we don't get to see anything for holiday. It goes straight to Christmas.
Yeah.
And my uncle says, I'm fine with that because I know something. I know that when Christmas is coming, I know there's something before Christmas that's going to happen, and that's Thanksgiving.
I know when I see the signs of Christmas, of the travail of of the birthing pains, as it were, the end times of the tribulation times. We see that, so we understand that that means what happens first is the rapture. So for us, that just points more and more to this rapture, and the Indiana Jones connection. That's kind of interesting to know. There was a man named Vendell Jones. In fact, we know several guys who have been dealt with him over the years. Our uncle, Dr. Lindstedt, has actually dug with him in the Column Cave at Qumran. Jim Barfield, one of the Copper Scroll projects, have done a little work with him as well. And in the end, unfortunately, he became very confused. He said that you could get to heaven via Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. And I think that might be, someone said at one time, I think maybe even some of his children converted to Judaism. And I'm wondering if that might have had something to do with it. But, it's, the ashes of the red heifer are not a new thing.
No.
It's not something that we just made up to start talking about prophecy. It's just now in the forefront because somebody actually took red heifers to Israel. And it's interesting. Some people ask me, "Hey, Mark, why is it 5? What's going on with that?" I said, well, that's the most interesting thing about the whole deal, in my opinion, is that there's an embargo, or whatever you call it, where you can't take livestock from the United States to Israel.
Right.
But you can take pets. And the maximum amount of pets you're allowed to have is 5. So there's a man who has 5 pet red heifers in Israel. So that's one of those interesting things there. And really that's all it is for us, is to know that we see the signs coming that say we're in the latter days, and we're approaching the end times.
Yeah, exactly. And it's exciting to us to see the progression of the predictions in the Bible.
Yeah.
What just floors me, when I was young and I first started to question about the Bible, and I went to the college and I was kind of, talked out of things or whatever, if you will, until I came back and started reading things, is how detailed the Bible is. Now, if you look at the prophecy of Tyre, and we don't have the time to do it, there's all sorts of prophecies that are talked about in Tyre, that all of the wall, all the buildings will be knocked down. And then all of the ground will be scraped flat.
Yeah.
And then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And it was like, how can the Bible be so precise on that? And then it all came true. So what happened was, yes, they did knock down the city of Tyre, and all the people from Tyre, they were part of a great navy, went out to an island, right?
Yeah.
And then Alexander the Great came down, and he says, hey, I want to conquer them on that island. So he took all of the materials of that city that was torn down and built a bridge. And not only that, he took in big animals with scrapers and actually scraped the rubble up to make this bridge. And it just amazes me, the detail, and to see the detail that's given now of what's happening in the future. That's why we can look at these things and say, here's the red heifer. We know that this is gonna have to stop, so it has to start.
Yeah.
Which means it has to happen before this.
Yes. So. Yeah. Well, and we see that. I mean, it's interesting. And here we see this next article that I pulled up here it says Hamas cites the red heifers as part of the reason why they started the war on October 7th. And this has been discounted. This has been proven. This has been discounted. So what do you say? I think that it probably is. I think that if they did have the red heifer ashes, it gives Israel another feather in their cap to say, hey, let's go start to do what we need to do on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, I agree with that. I find it interesting, and I'll let you speak to this, how all of these different religions, including Islam, steal things from the Bible and try to make it their own.
Yes.
I'll let you get to the red heifer here in a minute, because I know that the Muslims don't think the heifer is red.
Yeah.
And I know that you want to talk to that. But it amazes me. We were watching a program the other day, and this guy was talking about how, the Bible has borrowed all of its stories from all these different religions, and I think that it's the other way around. I think that the Bible is the constant, and everybody's taken stories from the Bible and tried to adapt them to themselves. One of them that I can bring up that I know about is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, in the Bible, we had the Noah
Yeah.
and his wife and his sons' wives, 8 people that were saved on a ship from a global pandemic of water, a global flood. And the Bible describes a ship, and it's the perfect dimensions. We use that same footprint for building aircraft carriers today because it's
Yes.
correct.
Yeah.
The Epic of Gilgamesh records a different amount of people, a different time, a local flood, and that the ark was a cube. Guess what doesn't stay floating upright? It just spins like a ball in the water.
Yeah.
This has been taken from the Bible and adapted to be something other than what was in the Bible.
Well, you know, there's another cube that's worshipped in a certain
Oh.
place of the world. And come to find out, the other day I was doing just a little bit of research, and I haven't finished the research yet, but they're being able now, I think, to prove that that was an ancient Semitic, or that was an ancient Edomite tribe that worshipped a cube god. So really, that's not even an Allah thing.
Right.
So it's an interesting concept, but yeah, the research I did regarding the red heifer in Islam was they blamed the Bible for copying their text.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, I don't think Numbers 19 was written anywhere close to 500 AD. I think we're off 1,500 years, maybe.
Quite a bit of years.
But it says that the Numbers 19 copied the Muslim writings where they used a word that could mean either gold or black, and the Jewish person couldn't figure it out, so they wrote red.
Yep.
But if you ask the imam or the caliphate or whoever the teacher is there, well, that word means either black or gold. Well, what color was it?
Right.
And what they've done is they've actually gotten it confused with the golden calf in Exodus, and they're so confused with that, but they don't care. In Islam, they don't care. They just move on with the story. It's just like Moses' wife is 1,500 years younger than he is, I think.
Yeah.
They get the wrong person in there. The sister of Aaron or whatever. It's a daughter of Aaron or something, and so it all these religions borrow
Yep.
from the Bible. And they get it wrong every time.
Exactly. And one of the things that I struggled with was, as a young person, is all the quote unquote apparent conflicts.
Yeah.
I find no conflicts in the Bible, but in every other religion, I find conflict after conflict after conflict.
Yeah.
And the thing that I also see is anymore, this generation that we see now can accept conflict and have two opposing ideas and believe them both.
Well, that is so apparent in the fact of this blows my mind. You go look at who's protesting for Hamas right now. Who is protesting for the terrorists and saying, free Palestine, give Hamas what they want. And these are all the people that Hamas would murder for their way of life. I don't understand that. That's like the chicken rooting for KFC.
Exactly.
I don't get it. My mind doesn't wrap around that type of thing. But like we said at the beginning of the show, the open hypocrisy in our own government, our own court system right now, I never thought I would see a day where the United States would have open hypocrisy and not care.
Yep.
And this is really troubling to see our country going this way. And then we see in this next article here, we see the Hebrew media claims that the red heifer was brought by Christians to bring about the Antichrist. And, the Jewish idea of the red heifer is really interesting as well. We understand what the Jewish idea is, what they plan to do is to cleanse the Temple Mount. But this would be the 10th red heifer. And according to the Jewish oral Torah, or the Tanakh, is that this would be the 10th one, and then the 10th one is the year of the Messiah, when the Messiah comes. Now, the Messiah has already come.
Yep. It says they're going to recognize him and they're going to regret what they had done. So maybe this is the...
I think that the 10th red heifer might be the second coming of the Messiah.
Yep.
And that's really interesting to think about that way. But the way the Jewish people believe is that they think that the 10th heifer comes, the Messiah makes himself known, the kingdom on earth is set up, Jewish people become administrators of Christ and of God, of the Messiah and God to the rest of the world. All religious differences fizzle away to nothing, and we live forever with the Jewish people being the administrators of God to everybody else in the world.
It sounds to me like they're describing what will probably happen in the millennial kingdom.
Yes.
It says, I also know that it says in the Bible that they will look upon who they had pierced,
Yes.
and they will realize that they made a mistake. And it seems like that prophecy, even though I don't put weight in Jewish prophecies and Muslim prophecies, because it's interesting, the Muslims have something they call the Mahdi, and he is actually called the Antichrist.
Yes.
And they call him the Antichrist because he's against Christ. He's the 12th
He's going to rule
for
for
7 years. Yep.
7 years.
So, well, I don't put a lot of weight in those, but I find it curiously interesting that they all kind of follow what the Bible says about different periods and are taking snapshots
Yes.
and trying to interpret them. But
Well, like you say, they keep taking from the Bible and they just get it wrong.
they take what they want.
Yeah. Well, I agree with the Muslim. There is going to be an Antichrist. He's going to rule for 7 years.
Yep.
And then he's going to be cast into the bottomless pit
For 1,000 years.
for 1,000 years. And then released a short time and then cast into the lake of fire forever and ever for eternity. And that's one thing I do get aggravated at when people tell me, oh, I'm just going to party in hell with the devil. Well, I'm here to tell you that the devil doesn't rule hell. He is a person stuck in hell with everybody else in hell. He's got no control over it.
Exactly. Right.
And I once heard a street preacher talk to somebody who said, I'm just going to party in hell. I'm going to get a beer with my friends. And he says, that's cool. I'm going to light you on fire. I'm going to throw you a beer and you tell me how good it tastes while you're burning.
Well, I think the misconception is I don't think you're going to see anybody else in hell.
No.
I think you're going to be alone.
Yeah.
And in your torments. And I think not only are you going to be what I would call physically tormented, but even more so, you're going to be mentally tormented.
Yeah.
That you had a chance to come to God. Mm-hmm. You had a chance, and I think it's going to be one of those regret, like you won't understand regret for forever.
Yeah. Well, and, as we talk about prophecy, I like this slide. This is what our uncle, Dr. Lindstedt, likes to discuss. And he says, if you really want to know what's going on in end times, in the latter days, then you should think of the stopwatch or the countdown clock for the end times this way. Israel as a country would be the hour hand. It kind of moves slow. You can keep track of it. Things happen, but not so quickly. Then the city of Jerusalem happens to be the minute hand. Things moving a little quicker there. Something happens in Jerusalem, you better pay attention. But really, the Temple Mount is that second hand. It's constantly going. And if something kicks off on the second hand, be ready for it.
Just 1 second of anything will cause an upheaval like you won't imagine.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Lindstedt showed a video where they were trying to do a sacrifice, and this person's got this bag and they're trying to get up the side of this mountain, not on the Temple Mount, but and it's got a lamb in it.
He was trying to get a lamb onto the Temple Mount for a sacrifice. And
But
I think there was 20 or so people arrested this last week doing that.
If that happens, the Muslim world is going to come undone. You think, say, Palestine now is or kudos to Hamas is now. You just wait till that happens. That'll be a day.
Well, Israel is so convinced that there's going to be a third temple built that they're running a high-speed rail to the Temple Mount.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is that I think it's Saudi Arabia is their partner in this. There's going to be a train from Saudi Arabia to the Temple Mount. And, just before everything started with October 7th, there was talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel about a new status quo. You remember when Israel took the Temple Mount in the Six-Day War, they were promised that if they allowed Jordan to rule over the Temple Mount, to just kind of keep track of it, that there would be what they called the status quo, meaning anybody could go up there to worship and to pray and it'd be okay. And then as soon as Jordan got control, they said, no, it's only Muslims, no Jewish prayers, no Christian prayers, no Bibles. You're not allowed to take a Bible on the Temple Mount because it's a book that sparks rebellion. Well, I hate to tell them, I have a Bible. Actually, I've got like 3 or 4 Bibles right here on my phone when I go on the Temple Mount.
Right.
So it's a silly thing to say, but that's how it is. And Saudi Arabia was promising, hey, we're going to give you a real status quo. We'll give you $100 billion if you make us the caretaker of the Temple Mount. And then from there, we're going to allow you to worship and pray. We're going to let all the nations come and worship on the Temple Mount. And so that was happening just before I just did a thumbs up, and it did a thumbs up on my screen.
I was wondering what that was.
I need to turn off those emoji things on my on my camera. Anyway, but all that was coming to about the time that Hamas attacked Israel. That they didn't want peace. They don't want that peace.
No.
They don't want the status quo to really happen on the Temple Mount.
No, and they don't want a two-state solution either.
No.
Israel doesn't want a two-state, and the Palestinians or the Arab people don't want a two-state solution either.
I remember seeing, and I wished I remember the name of the person, but they were supposedly Palestinian, and they were doing the 23andMe. They were doing Find Your Roots, and it turned out that she was Arab.
Yep.
And here's the truth: there are no Palestinians.
No.
And really, the word Palestinian was actually a derogatory term toward Israel. They called it Syria-Palestina because the Roman general was so angry at Bar Kokhba for rebelling and not being able to be taken over. But Palestinian really means Philistinian.
Yep.
And there are no more Philistines.
No, they were all wiped out.
So she thought she was from Palestine, and she found out she was Saudi Arabian. And it's like, I would say most of the people in these areas probably belong in Saudi Arabia.
That's true. We have a good friend that he's a pastor over in Hawaii, and he said when he was a kid, he was always told he was Palestinian, and after he grew up and he was able to research all this and figured out, he finds out he's not Palestinian. He is Arabian.
Yeah.
And his parents lived in that area, and he is now a Christian, and not only that, he's a pastor of a church.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing. That last slide there was a man who was telling everybody that those who believe in a pre-trib rapture are escapists.
Oh, yeah. I heard that my whole life.
And you know what? I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm okay with being called an escapist. Yeah, I don't want to stay here through the tribulation. Have you heard what's going to happen? In the first few seals, I think a quarter of the population of Earth is going to die.
Yeah.
A couple billion people?
And
you want to be here for that?
And the thing that gets me on that is there's people who will argue with us that half of the seals are not judgments of God.
Yeah.
But yet, a quarter of the population will die in those seals.
Well, and then you look at the fact that if you read into it, it says you'll be saved from the wrath to come, and the word "from" there is erecto, meaning out of, not drug through.
Right.
So you'll be saved out of the wrath to come. You also look at the Jewish bride, the way that works. You know, a man leaves his father's home, picks a bride. He picks the church. Jesus leaves heaven, picks the church. They agree on a price. They pay the price. The price he paid was his life.
Right.
Then he's resurrected. And what's he do? Just like the Jewish wedding, he goes home to his father's house to build a residence for them. And then when he comes back, he says, okay, I'm ready. And there's no set time for him to be gone to build this.
No, it's all dependent on his father. His father comes and says, I think the house is done.
Yes.
I think that things are ready for you to go. And it's interesting. I've had people argue with me that Jesus wasn't God because sometimes on earth he suffer's not a good word. He had human attributes. He was tired. He was hungry. He was this. He was that, just like a human. And it says on earth, when Jesus says this, he says on earth, I don't even know the time that I'm coming back because only my Father knows. Well, that's the way the wedding worked.
Yes.
The Father tells the Son, it's time. And then it's time to go. And I think once Jesus, who cloaked his divinity, went to heaven, he knows exactly when he's coming back. It was just because when he was on this earth, he lived as a man and did things as a man to show us how to live on this earth as a man or a woman.
Well, and then he comes back to claim his bride. He says, ready, right? And what's it say? With the trump, with a loud voice in the clouds, he says, ready.
Yep.
We go up, and the key thing there is that in the Jewish wedding, he takes his wife to the new home. They're married. They go spend a week, a period of 7.
Right.
And then they come back and announce to the whole world. And I believe that's when Armageddon happens. So we have a comment here. It says, recently I've heard a lot of people talking about rushing a red heifer sacrifice to bring the rapture quicker. Do you think this is possible to impact the timeline of the end times?
That's an interesting question because I do think that people think in those terms.
Yes.
So we know from the religion of Islam and not the Shiites think that the 12th Mahdi
Yeah.
is going to come during a time of calamity, huge calamity. Chaos, wars, all sorts of things going on. So by their thoughts, they said, okay, if we cause this to happen,
Yeah.
if we become that thing that makes these things happen, that will make the Mahdi come quicker. So by Christians doing this, are they impacting what God's plan is? That's a pretty good question.
Well, I would say that nothing we do can impact God's timeline. Now, I do believe that he may be waiting for us to do the things we ought to do.
I agree.
Some people say, well, not till everybody's heard the gospel. Well, okay, did you tell your neighbor about the gospel?
Yeah.
Maybe your neighbor is the last person who needs to hear the gospel for the Father to say, okay, now we're ready.
I find it interesting, though, but I also think that scripture applies to the 144,000 Jews,
Yes.
Jewish males, because they're going to spread out during the tribulation. And when it says that we're not going to be able to even number the amount of people that they win and that those people are killed for their faith.
Yeah.
So my thing is I think I look back through the Bible and I see every time man tries to interfere with God's plan. Let's look at the very first one. Well, other than Adam and Eve, let's look at the very first one, and that would be Abraham and Sarah. And God says, you're going to be a father. In fact, his name, Abram, means father. And Abraham, which God changes his name to, means exalted father.
Yeah.
And here they are barren. They have no kids.
Yeah.
And so Sarah says, oh, I know. The custom back now and back in this day is if the wife is barren, then you can take the handmaid and have a child with her, and then that child would be your heir.
Yep.
That's not what God had in mind.
No.
And so Abraham acted on that with Sarah's blessing.
Yeah.
They have a child, and now Sarah is jealous of that child because she couldn't have a child. And that child has become a thorn in the side of Isaac's offspring since then, which was the promised son.
Yeah.
So, while I'm not against them taking red heifers over there, but when we think we can get in there and help God go a certain way and do a certain thing, I don't think that we really are helping.
No.
I think God's doing what he wants done despite what we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah.